You were on the brink. You were on the brink. You were on the brink.
We didn't watch that debate together, but I feel like every single Democrat who watched that debate had a pretty similar reaction, which was the first 30 seconds were, holy shit, Biden cannot be the nominee. This is not going to work. Talk me through what your headspace was like as you were watching it before we even get into the meta narrative.
I think most people's reactions, and this is like part of a lot of the root of like the cultural theory we stand for, everybody is in this meta space where they're reacting to it of like, holy shit, this is the candidate and he is flawed, right? And that was definitely like my heart dropped, right? In that, like, I'm like, he's not going to win this election based on this.
Well, you and I both called. You and I both said within a month he will have dropped out and Kamala will have stepped in. We both very early on called that this was pretty much what was going to play out.
Yeah, well, I think part of why we felt so confident was we saw the manufacturing of consent happening in the press. It's like the New York Times doesn't post the articles they post without very high up operatives that have a lot of like calling favors up with reporters. I do think that like that became more and more public the closer it got to him actually dropping out, where like Nancy Pelosi was using surrogates before and Barack Obama was using surrogates before, and then they just started saying it themselves. And that was the like last straw that pushed him out. So it was interesting to see that play out.
The other thing you said in the period between that first debate and the first assassination attempt on Donald Trump, you said something I thought was really smart, which was that if you look at this election through the lens of narrative, Joe Biden stepping down and Kamala Harris stepping up is inherently a really, really, really attractive narrative to people's brains.
Well, first of all, framing this election, 30,000 foot view, I think a lot of times we get caught up in the week to week cycles and all that, but these really are about big picture vibes and what are the big narratives. And Trump's narrative has always been this anti-establishment, government is broken, I can fix it, right? And Joe Biden's narrative was that Trump is an existential threat to democracy and we have to stave him off. So there's already like, I think, a weakness in that position because it's rooted in the opponent rather than yourself. My biggest problem with that narrative is we already had Trump as president. So it's like, how can you go to people and say, if you elect this guy, we lose our democracy when we already elected him and we didn't lose our democracy. And oh, by the way, your McDonald's cheeseburger was $2 cheaper, right? Yep. And gas was cheaper and all of that. So all of that said, Joe Biden needed to drop out. There's like an economist, both of us like Ben Hunt, who had written about it. And he talks about these ideas of the common knowledge game, which is these moments where all of society, not all of society, but a lot of people feel something, but it's not being voiced. And there's like this performative layer on top where we're acting like it don't be that way, but it do. And then there's a moment where the emperor has no clothes moment where somebody calls out or something happens and everybody's like, okay, yep, we're on the same page. It's common knowledge now. And that debate was the common knowledge moment that Joe Biden is too old to be president.
The thing that feels really interesting to me about this is how much it underscores that these beliefs that we were all holding and acting like they're central to our identities are total and complete performance, because they will change on a dime in 180 degrees and everyone gets behind them pretty much overnight. And there's no rectifying of like, isn't that insane? That, another one that feels relevant is like the lab leak theory with COVID, where in a very, very short amount of time, it went from, if you believe that COVID-19 was leaked from a lab, you're a xenophobic conspiracy theorist who's getting removed from social media, to, yeah, that actually is a pretty legitimate theory about the origination of this virus. And there was no deep introspection about, wow, that's a really crazy 180 degree tone shift to have as a thought. Either those beliefs that everyone was projecting as being deeply firmly held weren't firmly held at all, or people are just really, 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 really malleable when it comes to group thinking.
Yeah, it's probably all of the above. And you know, that's what happens when our dominant form of communication is effectively propaganda, in that like we're not actually addressing the Wuhan lab. We're attaching it to something else related to identity of like, well, if you believe that, you're a conservative or you're a liberal or whatever. And so once you have that permission structure where it becomes not attached to identity, there's probably an interesting insight there into like how to do good counter propaganda. How can you decouple things from identity in order to get people to look at them more critically? But
it reminds me a lot of the work we did for the Brink Foundation when we had prominent figures on the conservative side of the culture war talk about the idea of echo chambers and algorithms manipulating and controlling people's beliefs. Yeah. We leveraged Cameo to get like Joe Arpaio to talk about that and stuff.
Yeah, and Sarah Palin.
Did you know that you're watching me just because some YouTube algorithm decided that you needed to watch me? If we only see what they want us to see, well, we're not thinking for ourselves, are we?
Just a similar thing, right? Where it immediately kind of de-wedges a wedge issue.
So I called out, yes, I agree that Joe Biden has to drop because we reached this common knowledge moment, and you can't go back. You saw it immediately in the 2 weeks fall. He could go give a speech and 95% of it was great, and the 5% people are laser focused on, and there's nothing you can do to change that. So given that, I thought Biden needed to drop, but I had called out that I think within this debate of like, should Biden drop, should he not? I was seeing a lot of people saying, if Biden drops, we lose no matter what, because we look like we're in disarray. To me, from a narrative point of view, if Joe Biden's main argument is that Trump is an existential threat to democracy, then him selflessly dropping out of the race, because it's not about him, it's about this threat, and then elevating Kamala Harris, that immediately puts the narrative back in their court where they're like, oh, maybe they're right. Maybe this is important, because how many people put the country above their ego? So my prediction was that would be a climactic enough moment that all of the vibes and all of the energy would shift to Kamala Harris. I saw a number of people that said, look at how bad her approval rating is. And I told people, I guarantee you, she gets a 10-point jump within 2 weeks of this happening. And that's exactly what happened. And now she's 16 points over where she was before then. And that goes to show it had nothing to do with her. It was about these big narratives. And when you get that shift in the narrative, then of course it changes people's feelings and opinions.
Yeah. So JD Vance gets announced. And one of, I think, the more cunning pieces of propaganda from the left throughout this entire election is immediately dropped, which is this thing of like, JD Vance is a freaky bitch. These people are weird.
Yeah. Which was, I think, the first time in a very long time that it actually felt like Democrats were gaining ground on narratives, and that like JD Vance fucking couches was like,
yeah,
like no bullshit. JD Vance fucks a couch was the most salient message the Democrats had in like 8 months or something like that.
Yeah, let's talk about that idea of why do we think that going from the more traditionally American narrative for defeating an enemy, which is Trump is simultaneously a bumbling buffoon idiot and an existential threat to the American democratic project at the same time. Why is it more resonant and salient to just go, aren't these guys fucking weirdos? What is their deal? Like, why did that work more?
Yeah. Well, that's like very classic, because Trump's archetype is strongman, and you make strongman stronger when you say to fear him, right? So anytime we have messages where it's like Trump's a threat and all that, all we're doing is making him look stronger. When you're like, this guy's weird, now that's the antidote, right? That's the complete opposite counter narrative. And they are kind of weird. So now you can pull proof points and you can be like, look at this weird thing JD Vance said. Look at this weird thing. It's funny. I've called this out before that, like, I think very similar to the counter propaganda that was happening in World War II, coming out of Britain, for example, where they would do like pirate radio signals that they were sending into Germany. And they had basically fake radio programs that they pretended to be broadcasting from Germany, because you can't tell where it's broadcast from, right? You're just getting the signal. And their version of counter propaganda wasn't look how dangerous fascism is. It was look how silly these guys are. Why are they wearing these silly outfits? And did you see what Hitler did today? Like it was like kind of gossipy and kind of irreverent. And I think all of it's rooted in making people like say, yeah, they're right. This is a little silly. Like you're kind of deflating. You're poking holes in the strength of the show, the production that's being put on by like you're making people aware of the production and stepping outside themselves and being like, okay, let me think a little bit more critically about it and not just buy into it.
Yeah, I mean, I think yes, all of that coupled with I think these guys are weird narrative allows for a release pressure valve that Democrats had not been able to solve yet, which was Trump can be funny. And I've had an issue kind of from day one with the fact of if you're going to have this very clutching at my pearls dramatic narrative around him, it doesn't leave room for the fact that he's been an entertainer for 40 years. He has good comedic timing. He can say stuff that is just straight up a funny zinger. And this narrative of, to me, these guys are weird is the Joe Biden 2020 when he was like, come on, man, this guy's a clown. It was tapping back into that, which was like the most popular thing he did during that election.
His best moment in 2020 was, will you shut up, man?
Yeah.
At the debate.
Like and
I think he won the election with that moment.
Yeah. It taps more into that idea of this guy's ridiculous. Yeah. And ridiculous people can do dangerous shit. It doesn't immediately negate that, but you're focusing in on this idea of really, like, this is your guy. If you're driving a truck and have the Circle K coffee and like a Baby Yoda bumper sticker, this is the dude who you think is going to save America. This dude's a fucking weirdo. Like, I think that's just such a more powerful narrative structuring, and it really put them on their back heel. I mean, that coupled with very quickly Kamala stepping in really put the conservatives on their back heels for a while. I remember you and me being like, damn, dude, they have been just not landing a hit for weeks in that shift. Yeah. Which, let's talk about that. So J.D. Vance, he's weird. Very quickly after that, Joe Biden officially steps down, welcomes in Kamala Harris. Her campaign starts by dropping what I think was the sickest political spot of the year, that freedom one.
In this election, we each face a question. What kind of country do we want to live in? There are some people who think we should be a country of chaos, of fear, of hate. But us, we choose something different. We choose freedom.
So this spot drops. Immediately, Nene is pretty hard on anyone who was like, how can a candidate get a campaign together that quick? Like, this is such a polished and coherent, here's what I'm running on, here's why I'm running, which does a few things I think are super smart. The first one being, it taps into this idea of all of Trump's narratives, turning them on their head and saying, what do you hate America? Like, you're un-American, but you're so fucking negative about our, like, instead of being like, you're threatening the institutions that kind of everyone thinks don't work anymore anyway, you're saying, what's your fucking deal, dude? Do you not think America's number one?
Yeah, that was a very important, maybe subtle, but important pivot from Joe Biden. Kept talking about democracy. His message was always rooted in like the nuts and bolts of governance that he cared about. He talked about NATO 50 times after the debate. It's like, dude, nobody gives a shit about NATO, right? And he's like, Trump's going to get us out of NATO. And it's like, nobody cares, And so that pivot when Harris took over, talking about freedom, which is completely divorced from institutions and very universal, and something that then you can take very tangibly, the threats that you are pegging on Trump, like the threat to abortion, the Project 2025 stuff, all of that can then ladder up to it, but it feels less wedgy and also less rooted in these institutions people don't care about.
Yeah. And in this, to dive just one step deeper, a lot of problems I think that Democrats struggle to talk about in a way that's compelling to the American spirit and to the center. Freedom to be free from gun violence. reproductive freedom. I felt like it was finally able to encapsulate a lot of core issues for the Democratic establishment in a way that was really energizing and exciting. And then, to me, this narrative messaging feels like the thing that probably someone around your age did for this campaign of like, let's do freedom as the center of how we're going to move ahead. And then some Zoomer was able to get involved and was like, have Charlie XCX call Kamala Harris Brett, which started this whole other undercurrent at the same time.
I'd assume Charlie XCX just did that on her own and they just jumped on the train, but maybe not. Maybe it was a coordinated effort behind the scenes.
That's an interesting thing to talk about, I guess. We're never, to my knowledge, there's no way for us to know, but I would think that for sure someone was like, do this.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know. Neither of us know, so it's not worth talking about. I think where that was at. Also, by the way, the meme aspect of Kamala kicked in day one.
Yeah.
In fact, before this came out, the coconut pilled, like everybody was talking about, let's get coconut pilled.
Yep.
And that was the strongest meta irony I had seen out of very hardcore leftists, that like they would be like, fuck Kamala Harris because she supports genocide, this and that. But they're like jumping in on the like getting coconut pilled in that like kind of ironic but also like loving way that you need that like that kind of like, yeah, groundswell of just internet chatter that I think we saw this happen with Trump, where it starts off as being like, ha ha ha, I'm being ironic right now, but it does become rooted in some sort of truth that people latch onto.
Doesn't matter. It's the exact same arc that happens all the time with music, where people will play LMFAO because they think it's funny.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you're like, this was funny to me, but now I just kind of like this song.
Yeah.
And I watched it happen with a lot of people I knew on the left who had said in the prior 6 months, I cannot vote for Joe Biden again. I'm not doing it. Swinging over really quickly to just like, fuck it. Wine mom president sounds nice. Like let's go. This compared to what you've been hitting me with, which is just two 80-year-old dudes like screaming at each other. Let's rock it out. I'm down. And it was really interesting to watch how quickly, whether that was people in center leftists within the Democratic establishment being really excited about this candidate, all the way over to far left people just having nihilistic fun with coconut content. Very interesting to see a groundswell. How long has it been on the left since there's been energy and excitement that isn't based on fear of the right? Like
Obama.
Yeah, it's been such a long time since I've seen that.
Yeah. Going into the DNC, you hinted at this already in that like part of this ad we watched. The freedom message does also feels patriotic. Like they think America sucks. We don't. That came heavy in the DNC. The DNC was the most jingoistic, patriotic DNC I've seen in a very long time, especially in contrast to the RNC. That is an interesting, complete realignment of what usually each party associates with and symbolizes.
Yeah. I mean, that's been my big soapbox for this specific election cycle, is it feels to me like the final form of this thing where the American left and the American right really don't represent coherent policy anymore. You have the American right talking about how MLK was assassinated by the deep state and how multinational corporations shouldn't exist and we shouldn't be profiting off of foreign conflicts and foreign wars, and like social media monopolies need to be broken up. And you have the left talking about how we need to continue funding proxy wars. Dick Cheney is endorsing Kamala Harris. It's this weird devolving of just the Democrats sort of standing for and absorbing everything that is, let's retain the status quo, let's retain things as they've been, let's maintain order, let's maintain togetherness as a byproduct of that, let's bring everybody in, let's bring everybody along. But a lot of really, really big ideas are getting sucked up into the engine of that.
Yeah.
And on the right, it's just any messaging point that sows discord, distrust, fear, a need to fundamentally reimagine the systems that are in place, and a lot of weird messages getting sucked up in that are arguably like foundationally leftist in their ideology.
Yeah. And I think that that's not going away after the cycle. And that's the bigger conversation in that, like, the Democrats, if they do genuinely want to protect democracy and preserve these institutions, have to reckon with why Trumpism is the way it is, before that gets redirected to less flawed candidates. Because I guess official prediction, I think Kamala's going to win this election, no problem. Honestly, there's an enthusiasm gap that I can see and feel in the same way I felt it in 2016. I thought Trump was going to win in 2016 based on that, and a lot of people didn't. We talk way too much about swing voters when I think, the difference is going to be turnout.
Here we are, less than a month out from the election. Trump, there was a second Trump assassination attempt. No one seemed to really give a shit.
And then he went back to Butler and had like a campaign event
with
where the original assassination attempt
that was the one with Elon.
With Elon trying to recapture the vibes of like, remember what happened. Still didn't work. Nobody cares.
That is one thing that's just nuts about this election, is the fact just how many crazy things have happened, that one of these would normally be like the story of an election cycle up until now.
Yeah,
and we
started at Joe Biden in the debate. 3 weeks before that, Trump was convicted of felonies.
We forgot about that. I forgot about that completely.
Yeah, like any other point in American history, somebody running for president being convicted of felonies is out of that race.
Yeah. There's at once this overload of narratives that are happening and performances that are happening, but also there's just an overload of things that are happening. Like, that's an insane number of things to have go down at the same time.
Yeah, and it is interesting too when each of these happens, how much, like, so then the entire social media ecosystem is immediately having meta conversations about what this means, right? Like, we're all engaging in the commentary around it at all times. It's like we're incapable of being like, well, wait a minute, we're so many weeks out and things could change. And then if you take a really big step back, it's like, well, nothing moves the polls hardly at all once things are locked in. These little week-to-week news moments or day-to-day news moments, none of them matter that much so long as the big picture narratives are still locked in place, because you can take them and piece them into where you think they fit. Like, Trump gets convicted of a felony. If Trump stands for anti-establishment, that just means the establishment's coming after him, right? That's not going to change your opinion. That aligns with where you're at. And if you're on the other side, it just affirms what you already feel about him, that he's a criminal, right? So that's why those things don't move the polls, because the big narrative stayed in place. It's only things that are actually able to deconstruct the big picture narratives that matter. But Biden stepping down is one such example of that. And I do think we did see some, I think, enthusiasm bump from the Trump assassination attempt because of how he reacted to it, because of the fist bump and all that. That really poked holes in the Democrats' narrative of who he is, right? And really affirmed him as a strong man. So it was a significant proof point, not a narrative realignment, but a significant proof point. So yeah, I think it'll be interesting, like, between now and the election, what could you possibly conceive of that could either realign the narratives, or maybe more cogently, what is something that could be like an incredibly affirming proof point to one of their narratives that drives the enthusiasm and the energy and vibes towards them.
Yeah. Well, we're a month out. Let's drop some predictions between now and the election. I think my one prediction would be that Trump or J.D. Vance attempts to come out as they try to do an about-face about abortion on some degree. That is one thing that I think will happen.
Most interesting thing that's happened in the last several weeks was when Melania Trump dropped a video of her saying that she is fully pro-choice. That to me was a very interesting chess move by the Trump camp of trying to figure out a way to have their cake and eat it too on this issue, where Trump doesn't have to do that, but it creates enough ground cover for women to be okay with voting for him. I don't think it's effective. I thought it was interesting, though.
It was interesting. I don't think it'll work. Do you have any predictions for between now and election day?
I mean, where my head is at right now is what I've seen out of Donald Trump is somebody who has decided he's probably not going to win and is more focused on what's going to happen after the election, in trying to sow as much discord, sow as much distrust as possible in our faith in these institutions. It just seems like that's what he's been laser focused on in the things he says. I actually think, like, strategically speaking, he thinks that's an easier path to winning than actually winning over voters at this point. So I think, given that that's where we're at, I think he's going to be doing as much as possible between now and the election to lay the groundwork for that. And that's what every move he makes is going to be rooted in that. But that said, that's not where his campaign is at, right? His strategists and stuff like that, they're just trying to win an election. So we're going to see that push and pull. We're going to see, like, the things he says when he's just standing for 2 hours talking in front of a crowd, very misaligned with the things that his campaign is kind of putting out and trying to cultivate. And my concern is who gets behind him. It seems like Elon Musk is going to get behind him. That guy has a lot of government contracts. He kind of went all in on this. He's got a lot of super fans. I think I've noticed the left or Democrats underrate how powerful Elon Musk is and how much his followers go along with what he has to say. So yeah, I'm not looking forward to that.
Interesting. And yeah, your official prediction is that Harris wins. I think I agree. I feel confident Harris will win. I feel like election night, I think we're going to hear the words, "We said this was going to be close. We didn't think it would be this close," a lot. I think that's where you and I disagree, is I think it's going to be really down to the fucking skin. And then my last prediction would be, and we were talking about this the other day, I think we're going to see in this election and elections going forward, I think we're going to see vice presidents become a lot more important to elections, just because we're coming off of 2 presidential cycles now where Pence stopped January 6th from happening and Kamala Harris became the president by being someone's vice. And I think that's going to just create a zeitgeist around the really intensive focus on vice presidents to a degree that you didn't really see in the first part of the 21st century. What spurred that thought for me was just trying to watch people rectify narratives exiting the VP debate, which was, and when it happened, I was flicking through Fox, CNN, MSNBC, just sort of riding the bandwidth. And there was this overarching narrative of, this doesn't even matter. Historically, these have never affected voter turnout. This really fucking matters because J.D. Vance might let January 6th happen, and we just had a VP become the president. And I was watching all of the channels try and balance both those narratives at once of, like, this has no legitimate impact, but also the VP has had a very central role in both parties over the past 8 years. Yeah.
Well, I think you and I would probably agree that anytime people are always talking about these, like, falling back on these historical narratives, they're missing just how fundamentally our society has changed.
Yeah.
And it's silly. I think I alluded to this earlier, but the narrative that I remember, another big narrative when it came to Joe Biden dropping out was, okay, who would be the nominee if he dropped out, right? Which I assumed he was going to endorse Kamala, and that's what. But if you played that thought exercise out, I remember seeing people say that, like, if the Democrats have an open convention, that's going to be so bad for them, right? Because it makes them look like they're not organized. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, it's the opposite. Like, that's like Aaron Sorkin writing, to have this, like, dramatic open convention, and then at the very end, everybody's cheering and coalesces around somebody. That would have been so good for them.
Yeah.
And that's where these, like, people fall back. It used to be the dogma that conventions were, if a convention was an open convention, it was a disaster for that party because it showed they weren't unified, and then Americans wouldn't have faith in them. And that's a very modernist narrative around this idea of what these institutions should be. Having the more entertaining and dramatic moment already is naturally better for them.
I think that point really, really cleanly summarizes what you've been using as a North Star during this election cycle, which is Conventional knowledge is no longer helpful. People of peak voting age in America have spent more time engaging with fictional narratives than they have real life, and are now seeking fictional narratives out more often than anything else, and looking at trend prediction, looking at how something is going to unfold. If you engage with and think about those ideas from the perspective of what is the more compelling or clean narrative, what's the thing that would feel best to our minds as a full story structurally, that's the thing that'll end up happening. And you called it on the dot with the entire Kamala Harris shift, right? This idea of I'm gonna step down, I'm gonna take a knee in the name of democracy, and I'm gonna say the future's up to you, and you're gonna step up and step into this moment. Like, that's a very narratively satisfying arc. I think that insight around what an open DNC would have looked like is a very good example of the same thing.
Yeah. I will say, like, if you get in the weeds right now, like, you know, on a week-to-week basis, they're trying to do the things you're supposed to do in a campaign of like, okay, here's our economic plan. Let's talk about that for a while. And they're just trying to check these boxes. But to me, like, none of that stuff, that's all a waste of time. And that's the one thing I'm disappointed in seeing with this campaign, that, like, you've got to be riding the enthusiasm wave and keeping that up. And these actions are not doing that. These are too wonky, and you're trying to convince nobody. So it would be nice. I would feel, as confident as I feel that she's going to win, I would feel way more confident if they would go back to Brat, Kamala's Brat.
Just vibes.
Yeah.
Okay. We've dropped some predictions. We've thought about where it's going to head. We'll follow up with something, whether it's another episode or some writing around what we said was going to happen. If it comes true, if it doesn't, we'll unpack that. Please go vote regardless of who you're voting for. Please go vote if you live in one of the 4 swing states where your vote matters.
This is Doublethink, conversations inspired by the themes of This Is Propaganda. Your hosts are Josh Belhumeur and Malcolm Critcher. This is a production of Brink. You can learn more at brink.com.